let's get this started here. I have been musing on something over the past week, and that something is style. Artistic style. Because I watched a video about this. People are always doing about these. You always see all these videos about fucking style. And people are always asking the same questions. They're asking, how do I develop my style? Well, don't worry about it. It'll happen. And the particular thing that I saw someone talking about this week was they were saying, your art teacher will always want you to learn a photorealistic style before you do anything stylized. And the reason they do this is because you have to know the rules before you break them. I don't think that's true. And what I think, the thing I think is actually important to understand here is style is not a thing that sits on top of another thing. It's a thing all by itself. There's no real anatomy and stylized anatomy. What there is real anatomy, and then there's simplification. You can simplify the real anatomy, just like you can simplify perspective, just like you can simplify lighting or composition. There are complex, detailed rules for these artistic fundamentals, but stylistically, you simplify these rules. You cut them down to a smaller group of rules. For example, you may know all of the proportions of the human body. You may measure it in heads, or, as I do, in anime titties. And when you measure out the human form, you may go, well, the head is this big, and the torso is this big, and the arms are this long, and the legs are this long. The feet take up this much space. The hands take up this much space. And really, the important thing is they take up the same amount of space. A person's arms are typically the same length, and they typically come out of the same part of the torso. They have elbows in about the same place on both sides. The wrists are about the same distance away. You can stylistically choose to have a character whose upper arms are shorter than their lower arms, or whose hands are very, very long. Or you may leave out the elbow entirely and just give them noodle arms. That can be a stylistic choice. The Rubber Hose School of Animation did this, for example, because it was cool, because it let you do neat things. But people act like you need to know where the elbow goes on a real arm to understand that you're putting it in the wrong place. No, I don't think that's right. I think you can know you're putting the elbow in the wrong place and say, but that's where I want the elbow. I don't care where the right place is. I think that's a valid artistic choice. And I think what that comes down to is the skill of simplifying something, the skill of simplifying anything, is a series of rules that you apply to the rules there already are. So, for example, if you decide, I'm going to draw a person's hair. Well, hair is composed of lots and lots of individual strands, and a lot of artists typically start out trying to draw all the individual strands. That doesn't work out too well. What works out better is to draw the hair in discrete clumps and to say, you know, this entire unit of hair will be drawn as one clump with a texture. It's kind of like clothing is made of individual threads, but you don't try to draw all the individual threads of the clothing. That would be insane. Nobody tries to do that. You simplify it in a way that makes sense for what you're trying to portray to the viewer, and you don't actually have to know the reality of it. You don't need to know the chemical process of what makes beer foam. You just need to know there's foam on top of beer, and put the foam on top of a beer in the way that somebody looks at it and goes, oh, that's clearly supposed to be a beer. The critical question is whether you are communicating what you want to communicate to the viewer. And if what you want to communicate to the viewer is a realistic human figure, then you need to know anatomy and you need to know all kinds of other things. But if you're not trying to communicate a human figure but another idea, it's not necessary to get everything perfect, to get everything right in the way that a lot of people are acting like you need to know how to do it right before you know how to break the rules. Don't learn how to break the rules until you know what the rules are. I think you need to know what rules are important, and what rules are important hinges heavily on what you are trying to do. Some rules are very, very important if you're trying to be photorealistic, and not important at all if you're trying to make a cartoon or something in an anime style. If you want to do something cel-shaded as opposed to something soft-shaded, the way that shadows soften on the way around a curved surface just isn't relevant. You don't need to know that. You just need to do your hard-edged cel shading. It's not important. But anyway, that's the thing that I'm thinking about, because I've been working on putting characters and environments this week, and I don't think I'm doing an especially good job. But let's go ahead and put the paint program on screen here. I painted this basement. I think the basement ended up looking pretty good. And I painted this old man, but let's take the old man and the line art out. And the first thing I did was this basement. And I do want to talk about how I did this basement in a minute, because I feel like that's important. But I did this kind of flat color drawing of an old man in the basement. I didn't like how it looked. So I redid the sketch. I redid the sketch right over top of the flat colors. And then I did line art over top of that, and I altered and fixed that. You can see that a lot of the sketch disappears in this, and the line art cleans a lot of stuff up, but a lot of the sketch just goes away. And then I did flat colors for that. And that's my old man. If I take the line art away, there's virtually no detail here, because I didn't bother to shade or anything, and nothing's very clean. I didn't even try to make things clean and simple and easy. But let's ignore the old man for right now, and let's talk about the basement and how I did this. I'm going to come up here to my little notes layer, and you'll notice, first of all, let me get my basic pen here. I have added some new brushes that I'm experimenting with. Let me talk about those real quick. I've still got my my soft airbrush, which of course I use for a lot of things. I come down here to this layer. Still got my soft airbrush. Of course, I use that for a lot of stuff. But I also have this basic pen. This has no pressure sensitivity at all. It's very basic. It's just a round, hard brush. That's it. Then I've got a hard pencil, which is it's got opacity to it, so I can shade with it. And the hard pencil, you got to put some. I'm gonna put some weight onto it to get a really dark line, because you can get very soft with it. And then the soft pencil is really easy to get dark with, and it's hard to get really light with it. And I put those together, and these are essentially, it's the horsehair brush and the wolf hair brush, but instead of mapping to the size of the brush, I have instead mapped to opacity. So these are opacity brushes. And really, I don't need to have these because things being the way they are, I can just come in here and I can map the opacity to pen pressure instead of the brush size. So I don't know if I'm going to keep these around, but I do want to mess around with them, and it's convenient. It's convenient to have them up here where I can work with them. Because I'm experimenting with a lot of stuff around brushes, and one of the reasons for that is the dry gouache brush. I'm really enjoying this particular brush. It does some very good things with texture, but most importantly, it does some good things with blending. Like if I were to take kind of a light blue, you can see even though I'm using a light blue and I'm going across this area, I'm not getting a lot of pigment out of it because I'm using light pressure. If I push a little harder, then I get some pressure, but you'll see that it blends into the surrounding color. And that blending effect is really useful. And I've been messing around with that, and we'll talk a little bit more about how I'm messing around with it and what I'm doing with it later. But for the moment, the thing I mainly did with the dry gouache was I laid out the initial I laid out the initial color for the wall, which in retrospect, I look at this and I go, that it shouldn't have been that color. Should have been much more of a bluish gray, something like this. Should have been more like that. And you can see here, you can see that my brush is really dragging because I was using a very, very large brush to lay this out. And that's one of the areas that the dry gouache brush really doesn't do a great job. But what I did with that was I laid out the initial color across the wall, going in the direction of the wall, kind of in perspective, okay? And then I laid in over top of that this notion of a midpoint on the wall here. Now that midpoint on the wall in both areas, the way that basement walls are constructed is typically they put up a form. They put up a wooden form just on the inside of where they want the walls to be, okay? And they put up that wooden form, and then they pour concrete into that to fill up the space. And depending on where you live, they may do this in different ways. Over on the East Coast, they typically do this with a big truck. And that big cement mixing truck comes over, and it starts pouring in the wall, and the wall starts to fill up from bottom to top. And when the first truck runs out, you have this even line all the way around. And then they have to move that truck, and they have to bring in another truck. Or sometimes they use the same truck and they just mix more cement. Either way, during this delay, the bottom part of the wall is drying. And because the bottom part of the wall is drying, when you go and you pour the next part of the wall on top of it, you have this natural separation between them. Now, this is, of course, bad because your walls will leak if you have this. So what they do is they give you this big stick. They give you this big, long stick. And you walk along the perimeter on the top, and you push this stick way down into the concrete, way down past that divider. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to walk along, and you're supposed to push it way past. And the way this is supposed to work is kind of like, it is kind of like it's like the fingertip blender, which of course I really like. So let's lay in this top area. So what happens is you walk along and you take that stick, and that stick runs down in, and you push that stick down in, and it pushes the concrete down. And then you move a little bit, and you push the concrete down, and you push the concrete down, and you push the concrete down. And if you keep it short, if you keep them overlapping, then you're pushing the concrete down, and what you get is this kind of, there's the two areas of concrete, and what you end up with by pushing that stick down in is you get this kind of V shape, and it's a jagged V. So you look at it from the side, and you don't go to the same distance every time. So it creates this kind of serration that goes down into the concrete and kind of forces it to have this little lip. So what you end up with is a construct where you've got the top part of the concrete, and you've got this spike going down into the bottom section of the concrete. And now, when the ground outside the basement gets wet, that water seeps in here, it goes down to the bottom of this, and it stops. It just sits there because it can't get all the way through. But if your construction worker is a typical human being, he's going to walk a little farther because he wants to be done. He wants to be finished. So what you end up with is, if you look here, you get that big, let me get this on out of here. What you end up with is, as he walks across, he'll do that big spike there and that big spike there. But because of this area right here, okay, because of this area right here where he didn't do anything, this area right there, you get this space. You get this space where, create a new layer there. You get this space where the water can seep through here, and it can seep through a little less there, and a little less there, and a little less there, and you get these little drip patterns. And right here, where we actually rammed the stick down into the concrete, the water can't get through because that that spike that he drove down through the wall is keeping the water from getting through, just like it's supposed to. But because he was sloppy and he walked too far in between the individual pokes of the stick, you get this space here in the middle. Now, something that I have seen over here on the West Coast is that they'll do it a little bit differently. And what they'll do is they'll put up the interior of the form, but they'll hand mix the concrete, and they'll put up a little wall here, and they'll pour the concrete in there, and then they'll put up another little wall here, and they'll mix concrete and they'll pour it in here, and then they'll pull that divider up and move it down. And what you end up with if they do that is you get these long areas where the water kind of drips through. You get these long bits where it's darker down at the end. So down at the bottom it will be dark, and then it gets lighter as it goes up. And those are the weak spots in the wall where the water can get through, which you don't notice until the house is several years older, because it takes that much time for the concrete to settle and whatnot and all of that sort of thing. And you can't really see the cracks where the water's getting through. They form over time. And it may actually form a visible crack here, but more frequently you just get these little wet spots on the wall. And all of that is just to explain why I did these wet spots on the wall here. And the way that I did them is just exactly the way I just said. I drew them, and then I used the fingertip blender to pull them down. I pulled them down really far in the one area and not quite as far in the next. And then I went over top of that and just kind of cleared off some of the top. Should have given a nice kind of smooth look to it. But that's how I did that. And the walls behind that, on the other hand, we're done with the dry gouache, and it just kind of followed the perspective. And I laid that in for all three of the walls. There we go. I had to save my recovery information. And I did that on all three of these walls here. And I'm being kind of sloppy here. I went all the way up to the corner with them. And once I had done all of these spaces in their flat color, I took a substantially darker color and a smaller brush, and I just kind of went down that area right in there. And once I had done that, now again, I'm using the dry gouache brush. I just kind of melded them together and kind of pulled that up onto the wall. And gave it more of a sense that there's this darkness over in the corner. And having done that, made the brush smaller, and I did a darker line. And I did some more blending with it, and then I made the brush smaller and did a darker line. And that was the process of getting it to look like that, and just give it kind of that darkness around the corners and lighter in here. Now, all of the blending over here, I think I did with opaque watercolor. Or was it with transparent? Because watercolor blends really well too. So you can really sort of get that sensibility of, you start with a color like this, and then you can blend that in by using light pressure. Now, what I'm finding as I experiment with other brushes is, and I think I've mentioned this in previous streams, it's the blending of the brush that makes the difference. It's that which is really doing the thing. And what I'm mostly concerned with when I'm using brushes is that I don't want to rely too much on having the right brush to do a particular thing. I want to be able to build that brush if I need to use it. So what I look at is I look at how the brush is constructed. And if you look at a watercolor brush, you know, the ink down here, you have this thing called color stretch. The density of paint, the amount of paint, the color mixing, what kind of color mixing. This is the important thing for brushes. This is the thing that I find makes the most difference. I don't understand it well enough to really explain it at this point. But I am looking at it and going, you know, hey, how does this work? Like dry gouache has a 0 color stretch. But if you come over here to the other gouache paints, you know, regular gouache has a 15. You do a thin gouache brush, that has a 70 color stretch. And it drops down, amount of paint is 80, density of paint is 80. You drop down here, it's 100, amount of paint is 100, density is 55, color stretch is 70. And these are the changes. Like with oil paint, it's a 40 on the amount of paint, 90 on density, and 10 on color stretch. Color change, this is a weird brush. I don't really know how to use this, so I'm going to ignore it for the moment. The oil paint flat brush, that is, that I think goes to brush tip. Yeah, it's a flat texture on it. And all of these are using textures, I think. It's like the thin gouache brush, the dry gouache, the standard gouache, the gouache blender, the pointillism. I'm really liking the pointillism brush, which I was talking a little bit earlier about having a big brush that really lags behind. And you can see the dry gouache really does lag behind. But if I flip over to pointillism, that's an even bigger brush. If I go down to the same brush I had for the dry gouache, it tracks just fine. It doesn't sit there continuing to go. Now, of course, it is a different effect. Let's do something a little bit more visible. That's a different effect than the dry gouache, but at the same time, look at the performance difference with the dry gouache. And also, I'm looking at the pointillism and I'm going, isn't this basically the same thing I did with my, isn't that the same thing I did with my leaf brush, more or less? Doesn't this do fairly good trees, just like right out of the box? I mean, it kind of does. It looks like it has about the same setup. There are some minor differences, but the pointillism brush is very similar to the custom brush I made for leaves. And you just come down here and go, here's our shadow. Here's the shadow of the leaves. And here's the main body of the leaves right here. And here's the kind of highlight on the top and the side over here. And that gives you about the same effect as my leaf brush that I put together, or what I call the speckle brush. Because it just is speckles, you know? If I take it up to the same size, it works about the same way. It just isn't quite as opaque. If I jump back down here, if I use similar colors, then mine comes out with larger dots, for one. But it does give you a similar effect. And the pointillism brush just kind of does that right out of the box. You don't have to worry about it. So you get similar effects with both of those, but I spent a bunch of time building the speckle brush, and the pointillism brush was just like already there in the thick paint area. But that's the when you look at the pointillism brush, it's mostly a it does have a spraying effect, which is the kind of thing that I'm looking for, but it does a lot of stuff over here in the ink and with the color mixing and all of that. So if I lay in some different colors, it should actually blend them together to some degree. Which my brush doesn't do. And you can see that, actually. And you can see how it's kind of sort of blending. It really gives you a kind of a subtle effect. So I kind of like that. I'm going to be working with that more. I need to do more work with brushes. I need to understand more about how brushes work. But to get back to the whole how I painted this wall here, I started with dry gouache. I used the dry gouache brush to lay in my base color. And then having laid in my base color, I used a substantially lighter color, and I did that with the watercolor brush, which again, I used a fairly large brush, but then I just kind of went back and forth and blended. And because I had done that that dark area down here, down at the bottom, that dark area, as I blended, that kind of made its way into the overall look of the wall. And after I had done that, you know, I did my after I had done that, I did my little drippies. Just kind of pulled those down a lot there, less here. Didn't worry overly about how the top of it looked because I knew I was going to erase that. So I did the kind of drippy area. And then I just used the transparent color brush to wipe it out. And obviously I did it on a different layer and not on the same. But yeah, that's how I did that bit. Now, when it came to actually putting the character on it, I was really very unhappy with how this turned out because he doesn't look like he belongs here. This is a very different style than the rest of the painting. And because it's a very different style, I just kind of look at it and go, that doesn't look like it belongs here. This guy doesn't look like he should be here. And I'm kind of wrestling with that, and I am wrestling with the question of how do I make my characters and my backgrounds gel with one another so they'll actually fit together and it will look like a coherent piece. I don't have an answer to that. I kind of feel like maybe it's okay if they differ in this way. There are a lot of anime that use near photorealistic backgrounds, and there are a number of fairly successful visual novels. The immediate thought I have is Higurashi no Nakokoro ni, that the backgrounds are just blurred and posterized photographs. So it's not even supposed to be the same art style. But I don't know how happy I am with that. I don't know how happy I am with that idea. And one of the things that I need to do with Groping Festival, the game that I'm working on, is I need to put characters in front of backgrounds. There need to be backgrounds for the levels, and I need to put characters in front of the backgrounds. And I don't know if it's okay for the characters to be anime style and the backgrounds to be more of a painting style. I am not sure about that. I'm still thinking about how I feel about that and whether that is a thing that I actually want it to do. But I'm trying to push in that direction. I'm trying to head in the direction of going, what is the stuff that I need to do to get this game finished? And how do I close the gap between where I am and where I need to be to actually do that stuff? So I'm kind of working on that and thinking about it. And I will, of course, be talking about it. I don't know that I have anything else of value to say tonight, so we're probably going to call it at this point. It's 38 minutes or thereabouts. So do the little YouTube dance, like, comment, subscribe, all that happy horse shit. And over the course of the coming week, I'm not sure what I'm going to focus on. I'm still kind of thinking about that. And if you were in the Discord, you'd know I was thinking about that because you go, oh shit, he's playing a lot of video games. That means he's got a problem and he's thinking about how to fix it. And if I'm playing a lot of video games, then I'm working on my problem. And if I'm watching a lot of movies, then I'm stuck and have no idea how to work on the problem. But yeah, there's a quantity of anime and media that is normal for me to watch, and there's a quantity that is excessive. And if that becomes excessive, there's a problem. But it is worth noting on the video game front. We're going to get the Shattered Space expansion for Starfield in a couple of weeks. It's not this Tuesday, but 2 Tuesdays after it. So that's going to consume some time. And that's going to have nothing to do with problems and solutions and thinking about things. It's just going to be, man, I sure am waiting for Shattered Space to come out so I can play it. I love Starfield. It's a great game. It's a fantastic game. I should get used to it again before Shattered Space comes out. but I'm playing Evenical right now. I'm playing Evenical in love language Japanese because number one, I want to play porn games, and number two, I've still been unsuccessful in getting myself to a place where I can sight read hiragana and katakana. But love language Japanese seems to be helping somewhat with that. So I think I'm going to focus on playing that a little bit more. Once I finish Evenical, you know, that'll be done. I don't see Evenical having a lot of replay value. There are a couple of choices you make in it, but I don't know if they actually matter. So yeah, that's kind of where that is, and yeah, I'm thinking very much about backgrounds and characters for the game and how those fit together, and that's one of the reasons that I'm playing the various eroge that I'm playing is they have backgrounds and characters that fit together. And I'm looking at them and I'm going, is this the kind of thing I want to do with my work? Is this the melding of things that I want? And I don't know. Maybe it is. I'm still thinking about it. And that's it. Yeah, you know, that's what I've got to say. That's you know. So okay, bye.